If you stand on the Mongolian steppe, you are standing on the largest contiguous grassland in the world. There are no trees to break the wind. There are no mountains to block the storm. There is only the sky, vast and terrifyingly open. In the winter, the temperature drops to 40 degrees below zero. In the spring, the wind gusts reach 100 kilometers per hour, carrying a dust that strips paint from modern vehicles. It is a landscape that demands movement. To stay in one place is to deplete the grass, starve your herd, and die. But to move, you must be light. You must be fast. And here lies the paradox that would have killed a lesser civilization. To survive the freezing nights, you need thick, heavy walls. But to survive the migration, you need a home that weighs almost nothing. A stone house would keep you warm, but it would anchor you to a spot where your animals would eventually starve. A tent would allow you to move, but it would shred in the gale force winds or freeze you to death in January. The nomads of the steppe were trapped between the physics of insulation and the logistics of mobility. They needed a fortress that could vanish in an hour. They needed a palace that could be carried on the back of a camel. To survive, they had to invent a structure that defies the square logic of modern architecture, a structure that doesn't fight the wind but tricks it. To understand the genius of the ger, you must first respect the enemy. The enemy here is the dzud. It is a specific Mongolian term for a winter disaster where the snow is so deep and the cold so intense that animals cannot graze. But the dzud has a partner, the wind. On the open steppe, the wind behaves like a fluid. It flows horizontally across the earth with massive force. When it hits a flat surface, like the wall of a rectangular house, it creates a high-pressure zone on the windward side and a low-pressure vacuum on the leeward side. This pressure differential can explode a building from the inside out. For thousands of years, humans have built square structures. We like corners, but corners are weak points. In the turbulent air of the steppe, a corner creates turbulence, vortices that hammer away at the structure until it fails. The nomads didn't have steel beams or concrete foundations to resist these forces. They had willow branches, they had sheep's wool, they had leather strips. They were living in a period of history where the empire was expanding faster than any other, fueled by horses and mobility. The army of Genghis Khan could travel 100 miles in a day. Their families had to keep up. If the home took a day to build, the army would lose its speed. If the home couldn't be packed onto a cart, the supply line would break. They were engineering for speed in an environment that punished fragility. They needed a shape that the wind couldn't find. The first attempts at shelter on the steppe were likely simple lean-tos or conical tents similar to the teepee of North America. And while a cone sheds snow well, it has a flaw on the open plains. A tall cone catches the wind high up. The leverage, the moment arm, is too great. In a 100-kilometer-per-hour gust, a tall tent acts like a sail. It tips over. Imagine the frustration of those early nomads. You are huddled in the dark, the wind screaming like a banshee. You hear the wood creaking, the skin covering flapping violently. The smell of the fire is choked off as the smoke flap blows shut. Then, with a crack like a whip, the main pole snaps. The structure collapses. You are left exposed to the killing cold, scrambling to find your children in the wreckage under the starlight. They realized that the cone was too unstable and the square was too resistant. They needed to lower the center of gravity. They needed to squat down into the grass. But if they lowered the roof, they lost headroom. They couldn't stand up. They couldn't cook. They couldn't live. They faced a geometric nightmare. How to build a wall that was vertical enough to give living space, but round enough to deflect the wind, all while using wood that was no thicker than a human thumb. The turning point came with the invention of the khana. This is the lattice wall. It is the spine and the soul of the ger. The engineering insight here is breathtakingly modern. Instead of using solid logs which are heavy and scarce, or vertical posts which are unstable, they created a dynamic mesh. They took thin willow branches, flexible, light, and abundant along riverbanks, and crisscrossed them. Where the branches intersected, they didn't nail them or glue them. They tied them with knots of raw camel hide. This is the brilliance. Rawhide shrinks as it dries, creating a joint that is incredibly tight but still flexible. This lattice wall works like an accordion. When you need to move, you push it together, and a 20-foot wall collapses into a bundle you can carry under one arm. When you need to build, you pull it out, and it expands into a rigid circular frame. This is a pantograph mechanism, the same mechanical principle used in modern scissor lifts and folding gates. But the real genius is how it handles stress. When the wind hits a solid wall, the force is concentrated at the impact point. When the wind hits the corner lattice, the force is distributed instantly throughout the entire web. The wall flexes. It absorbs the energy rather than fighting it. It breathes. They had invented a shock-absorbing wall centuries before the concept of elasticity was written down in physics textbooks. But discovering the lattice was the easy part. Covering it without suffocating the occupants would prove to be a lethal challenge. The construction of the ger is a ritual of precision. It begins with the door frame. The door is always, without exception, oriented to the south. This is not superstition, it is survival. In Mongolia, the prevailing winds come from the north and northwest. By facing south, the door opens into the sun and away from the wind. Once the door is set, the corner sections are expanded and tied in a circle. The tactile sensation of the willow is unique. It is smooth, polished by years of handling and the lanolin from the sheep's wool. It feels alive. The circle is perfect. A circle encloses the maximum amount of area for the minimum amount of perimeter material. It is the most efficient shape in nature. Then comes the roof. This is where the engineering gets critical. They use uni, long, slender poles. One end is looped onto the top of the lattice wall. The other end is slotted into the tuno, the central crown or wheel at the very top. There is no center pole. The entire roof is a compression ring. The weight of the roof pushes down and out. The lattice walls want to burst outward. To prevent this, they tie 2 or 3 bands of woven horsehair rope around the top of the lattice walls. These bands act as tension rings. They hold the bursting force in check. It is the exact same principle used in the dome of the Florence Cathedral or the US Capitol building, but made of rope and sticks. But then the crisis hits. The first snows arrive, wet and heavy, followed by the deep freeze. The structure is up, the frame is solid, but a skeleton cannot keep you warm. The wind on the step finds every gap. If you cover the frame with animal hides, they freeze stiff. They don't breathe. Moisture from cooking and breathing condenses on the inside of the cold leather, turning into ice. You wake up in an ice cave. As the fire melts the frost, it rains inside the home. The nomads needed an insulator that was breathable, flexible, and capable of trapping massive amounts of dead air. They turned to their sheep. They didn't weave the wool, they felted it. Felting is a violent process. You take the raw wool, wet it, roll it up, and drag it behind a horse for hours. The pounding forces the microscopic scales on the wool fibers to lock together, creating a dense, non-woven fabric. Here is the paradox. To stop the wind, they used a material that is porous. Felt is not airtight. It allows moisture to escape, preventing the deadly condensation. But the craziest thing is, the stronger the wind blew, the safer they became. The felt is heavy. When the gale hits the curved surface of the ger, the wind presses the felt harder against the lattice frame. The aerodynamic pressure actually tightens the structure, locking the joints and the fabric together into a single, unified shell. The storm doesn't tear the house apart, it hugs it together. The refinement of the covering is where chemistry and physics meet. The nomads realized that white felt reflects the summer sun. keeping the interior cool. But in the winter, they needed more. They layered the felt. 3 layers on the north side to block the wind, 1 layer on the south to catch the sun. They secured these layers with ropes made of horsehair. Horsehair is resistant to stretching when wet. If they had used leather ropes on the outside, the rain would make them stretch, the felt would sag, and the wind would rip it off. Horsehair constricts, it bites into the felt. And then, the crown, the tonneau. It is the only opening. It is a window, a chimney, and a clock. By watching the beam of sunlight move across the lattice wall, the nomad knows the time of day. But aerodynamically, the tonneau is a venturi. As the wind speeds over the curved roof, it creates suction at the top opening. This actively pulls the smoke out of the gear. It is a forced induction ventilation system powered by the very wind they are trying to hide from. The test comes in the dead of night during a black dzud. The temperature is -45. The wind is howling at 100 kilometers per hour. Outside, the world is a blur of ice crystals and darkness. A human left exposed would die in minutes. The livestock are huddled together, their backs to the wind, coated in frost. But inside the gear, the contrast is jarring. The air is still. The central stove, fueled by dried dung, argali, burns with a steady, hot blue flame. The temperature is 20 degrees Celsius. The felt walls, inches thick, have trapped the heat. The lattice walls are gently flexing, breathing with the gusts, creaking softly like a ship at sea. The family sits on carpets, drinking salted tea. The chaos of the atmosphere is separated from them by only a few centimeters of wool and wood, yet they are as safe as if they were in a concrete bunker. The circular shape sheds the wind effortlessly. There are no corners for the storm to catch, no flat surfaces to batter. The result of this design is a civilization that conquered the world. The Mongols didn't just survive on the steppe, they thrived. Because their homes were portable, they could move to fresh pastures every season, keeping their herds healthy. Because their homes were quick to assemble, a family can set up a ger in under an hour. They could outmaneuver armies that were tied to supply wagons and tents. Modern testing data confirms the brilliance of the design. A ger can withstand snow loads that would crush a conventional roof because the load is distributed evenly down the uni-poles to the lattice walls. The thermal efficiency of felt is superior to many modern fiberglass insulations, and the circular shape reduces the wind load by nearly 50% compared to a square structure of the same volume. The Mongolian ger is not just a tent, it is a machine for living. It is a testament to the idea that the best engineering doesn't come from fighting nature, but from understanding it. The nomad doesn't build a wall to stop the wind, he builds a shape that lets the wind pass. He doesn't use glue or nails, he uses friction and gravity. In a world where we are increasingly obsessed with permanence, with pouring concrete and erecting steel, the ger teaches us a different lesson. It teaches us that resilience is not about rigidity. It is about flexibility. It is about being light enough to move, but strong enough to stay. We build skyscrapers that sway in the wind to keep from breaking, a modern innovation that the nomads mastered 3,000 years ago with sticks and string. If you want to discover more forgotten ancient technologies that helped humanity survive, subscribe now and comment below. What type of ancient shelter should we explore next?